You spoke. We heard you loud and clear. Our last video on everyone's least favorite win condition was an unprecedented success. So we thought, do it again. So get your turbine and blades ready, because it's time to mill. Mill is an interesting mechanic. On its own, it doesn't accomplish anything. All it does is reduce the number of cards in a library and increase the number of cards in the same player's graveyard. Thanks to the wonderful rules of randomness, a well-shuffled deck is unaffected by removing an arbitrary number of cards from the top, although this can change if the player has scryed one or more cards to the top of their library. This tends to be a niche situation, so we're going to focus on the much more relevant aspects of mill, and as always, we're going to look at this from a designer's perspective. As I said, mill doesn't do much on its own. You need to combine it with other effects to make it worthwhile. The first effect that you can combine with mill is mill. In order to force games to eventually end, Magic has a rule that if a player would draw a card when there are no cards in their library, they lose the game. This means that if you can remove all of the cards from an opponent's library, they will lose during their next draw step. This is a viable strategy for winning games, but you need a lot of mill to do it. There are 4 main types of mill we see in many Magic sets. Burst Mill is a spell whose main purpose is to mill one time. These are cards like Tome Scour, Mind Sculpt, Compelling Argument. Almost all cards in this category are instants and sorceries, though Vessel of Paramnesia is here too. Most of these spells mill somewhere from 3 to 5 cards, though some of the rares put in overtime. If you want to win a game with Burst Mill, you'll probably need multiple copies of mill spells to make this work. This means that if you want to support such a strategy in your limited format, you should put a Burst Mill spell at common so that there are enough copies for a player to win with. If you only want to support mill in constructed, rarity doesn't matter. Consistent mill is a permanent that allows you to mill an opponent repeatedly. Things like Ruin Crab, Teferi's Tutelage, Towering Wave Mystic, Sage of Mysteries, Folio of Fancies, Iceberg Cancrix, Ashiok Dreamrender, Screaming Shield, Drowned Secrets, Psychic Corrosion, Patient Rebuilding, Numbing Jellyfish,
Much later.
Navigator's Ruin, Fleet Swallower, Seer of the Last Tomorrow, Fraying Sanity, Minister of Inquiries, Manic Scribe, Fleeting Memories, Sphinx's Tutelage, Altar of the Brood, Thassa's Devourer, Phoenix God of Deception,
Approximately 10 hours later.
Codex Shredder, Doorkeeper, Crosstown Courier, Chronic Flooding, Sands of Delirium, Stern Mentor, Shriekgeist, Nephalia Drownyard, Selhoff Occultist, Curse of the Bloody Tome, Jason.
1 eternity later.
These cards often use set mechanics to trigger mill, and generally mill somewhere from 1 to 3 cards per trigger. If it's something you have to work a little bit for, plan on milling 3. If you could potentially trigger it more than once in a turn, it should mill 2, and if it's going to be going off constantly, it can mill 1. This brings us to an important point: mill math. If you're trying to win with mill, yes, you want to remove all the cards from a player's library. But how many is that exactly? Limited decks tend to be 40 cards. The starting hand reduces this by 7. It will probably take you a few turns to get your mill condition online, during which time the opponent is still drawing once per turn. Say your win condition is Teferi's Tutelage. When that card comes down, it instantly mills 2, and now your mill formula is 3x plus 2y is greater than or equal to 28. X is the number of turn cycles. On each turn cycle, your opponent is drawing 1, and you are drawing 1, which causes them to mill 2. This means they are losing 3 cards from their deck each round. Y is how many extra cards you draw. For each one, the opponent mills an additional 2. Your job is to survive long enough that this inequality becomes true. If you drew no additional cards, the formula would be 3x is greater than or equal to 28. Divide both sides by 3, and you get x is greater than or equal to 9.3. That is, you need to make the game last 9.3 more turn cycles. If you were to draw 2 additional cards, you would have 3x plus 4 is greater than or equal to 28, or 3x is greater than or equal to 24, or x is greater than or equal to 8. With just 2 additional draws, you reduce the length of time you need to survive by 1.3 turns. And surviving is important. If your goal is to win with mill, your deck should be built defensively, because the longer the game lasts, the fewer cards your opponent has, the likelier you are to find your win condition, and the more time that win condition has to work its magic. Now that example was with one consistent mill spell. I won many games of M21 Draft with a single Teferi's tutelage, so obviously you don't need many copies of these cards to make a mill deck work. For that reason, they often appear at uncommon, though again, more powerful ones show up at rare. Hybrid mill spells are a mixture of the previous two types. They function like burst mill, but use set mechanics to allow you to reuse them in some way. There's not much more to say about these, so let's move on to our final type. Incidental mill is any mill effect tacked on to another card. For example, Nimana Skydancer mills 2, but more importantly, it's a 2/1 flash flyer. You're not playing this for the mill, you're playing it for the creature. Glacial Grasp mainly functions as a crippling chill, but has mill 2 as a bonus. Hammered Explorer, Overwhelmed Apprentice, Weight of Memory. Now these cards aren't going to mill out your opponent by themselves, but they can still be helpful. Wall of Lost Thoughts is a nice defensive card that will advance your clock by a turn or two. Thought Collapse and Didn't Say Please let you counter opposing threats while advancing your game plan. So including a few cards like this in your set can give your format's mill decks some extra help. The second way you can use mill to your advantage is with graveyard effects. Zendikar Rising gives us a good look at what a mill strategy looks like without decking your opponent. Blue and black feature various cards that gain benefits when the opponent has 8 or more cards in graveyard. Relic Golem becomes a huge beater for just 3 mana, Nimana Skittersneak becomes hard to block, and Soaring Thought Thief makes all of your hard to block rogues hit a little harder. This is nice because of how versatile it is. You could definitely try to mill out your opponent with Relic Golem and Ruin Crab, using them as defenders to keep you alive. But even if you can't get there, your other cards will get powered up and help you win with damage instead. You can also mill yourself.
So you're going to shoot me, huh? Well, the only person who shoots me is me! Good luck trying to shoot me when I'm already dead!
Original Innistrad featured a great self-mill theme in green-blue. You could fill your graveyard with Armored Scab and Splinter Fright, then win the game with Spider Spawning and Splinter Fright. Even in sets without a self-mill theme, there are always going to be reanimation effects, Raise Dead effects, mechanics that work out of the graveyard. There are many ways to take advantage of cards in your own graveyard. Of course, that also means that an opponent could have ways of using the cards that you mill from their deck. As it turns out, the Modern Horizons Blue-Green Snow mill deck wasn't very good against the Green-Red Lands and Graveyard deck. I'm not bitter. But for this reason, it's also important that players have access to an ability that can exile cards from graveyards. In Draft, the situational nature of these cards will ensure that they come to the person who needs them. Well, I think that's enough out of me for today. I hope this video has encouraged you and helped you to include some of the magic of mill in your custom sets. In other news, this was StrataGames' 100th video. Thank you so much for all your comments and support. We'll keep putting out content, and you keep letting us know what you'd like to see. We'll be back next Thursday with more custom cards.